Hey guys, what's up? Today we're going to be talking about the pre-American Revolution, taxes and the road to war. I found this picture on the internet. I thought it was pretty cool, so I figured I'd use it today. But we're going to get started really quickly. We're really dealing with Content Standard 1.2a today. So our target for today, we want to be able to understand things like taxation without representation, boycotts of British goods, the Stamp Act resolves, Committees of Correspondence, and the Boston Massacre through pictures, videos, and conversation about the topics. Now, if you were absent, I'm making this video for you so you can make sure to go back and see what we covered. Taxation without representation was something that we covered in our activity that we did earlier last week, where we had a king and we had two tax collectors, and we gave each person in the room a roll of Smarties, and throughout the activity, your Smarties were taken one by one in the form of taxes, and you didn't really have anything to say about it, right? So in that particular situation, you could be compared to one of these that was being taxed by Britain. What can you say about it? So the colonists ended up saying things like no taxation without representation. They said, please, Britain, you cannot tax us unless you're going to allow us to be represented in Parliament, the lawmaking body of Britain. So, taxation without representation, that should be a review, but let's get started. We'll kind of start with the Sugar Act of 1764. So the Sugar Act of 1764 was pretty simple. It was the first act put on the colonists as a whole, and the Sugar Act basically raised taxes on foreign refined sugar imported by the colonies. Okay, so it wasn't exactly just sugar, but we're really focusing on sugar for the sake of time. It makes it a little bit easier for you to understand. So because of this, British sugar growers gained a monopoly on sugar in the colonial market. Now, if you've ever played the game Monopoly, the whole point of the game is so you can take each spot on the board. That just makes a lot of sense. The more spots that you own, the more money that you're going to make. And yesterday I spoke about if the colonists could make their own sugar, wouldn't it make sense for them to just make their own sugar instead of buying from British sugar growers? But if you know anything about the climate of North America as compared to where the British East India Company was operating, the colonists couldn't exactly grow sugarcane. The climate wasn't great for it. So the British were the only ones that could actually supply sugar to the colonies. There was no other way they could get it. And because they were the only way that colonists could get the sugar, Britain had a monopoly specifically on sugar during this time. So the colonists had no choice to buy sugar from anyone else. So the Sugar Act raised taxes on foreign refined sugar imported to the colonies. The next act happened about a year later, and it's something called the Quartering Act. Now, if you've ever read an old book, or maybe you've heard someone speaking in an old way, maybe you've read the Harry Potter books, and you see maybe the end of a chapter or the end of a scene in a movie when someone's tired and they're ready to go back to their room and they say, I'm going to my quarters. Yeah, that basically means that they're going to bed. They're going to their room. So the Quartering Act is speaking about your own personal property, your own personal room. The Quartering Act specifically made American colonists give housing or any accommodations to any British soldiers at any point in time that they came and asked for it. They were also required to provide food for any British soldiers in the area if they asked for it as well. And you can imagine, as a colonist trying to fend for yourself, it's hard enough to do that on your own while also having to prepare for the unknown, like a British soldier coming to your house and you having to specifically take care of that person in any way, shape, or form. That's just not fair. And the British governments made the Quartering Act for the reason that they wouldn't have to pay for food and lodging for any of their soldiers. I mean, when you go on vacation, food and lodging are the most expensive parts of what you're going to pay for. Because everyone has to eat and everyone has to sleep. When you go to college, one of the best scholarships that you can get is for room and board, the place that you sleep and your board, your meal tickets, the things that you get to eat with. Those things are like gold in college, trust me, because you can't eat ramen noodles always. So the Quartering Act was huge. it saved Britain a lot of money, but it also caused the colonists to have to pay a lot more money in having to take care of these British soldiers. And that made him angry. So a little bit later, we had the Stamp Act of 1765. The Stamp Act of 1765 was pretty simple. I mean, it's called the Stamp Act, and it had to do with the stamp on the right, this particular stamp right here. Okay, so the definition of the Stamp Act on the screen, it says it was an act of British Parliament in 1756 that enacted revenue from the American colonies by imposing a stamp duty on newspapers and legal and commercial documents. So basically, the British put a stamp on every single legal and commercial document that there was in the colonies, and this affected the colonists in a significant way. Because they didn't have any technology, they couldn't text, they couldn't email, so they had to send letters to each other. They had to send newspapers out to be able to communicate information quickly. And that was a problem for the colonists. So it was hard for them to dodge the Stamp Act because it put the stamp on everything from newspapers to playing cards, things that every colonist used each day. And they were having to pay extra money for something that they used every day. Honestly, this would be like, in today's terms, every single time that you used a website or got on the internet, our American government had put a little picture of a bald eagle maybe up in the top right corner of the website, and every single time you visit a website like that, you have to pay an extra $1. Now, that's pretty unfair. Most people would say that that's ridiculous, and most of the colonists said that the Stamp Act is pretty ridiculous. I mean, the only reason that the British put together the Stamp Act was to clearly make money for Britain. No other reason at all. So the three acts that we start out with, we got the Sugar Act, the Quartering Act, and the Stamp Act to start out with. Obviously, this is going to make the colonists very angry, as you can see by the scribbled man flipping the chair. He's very angry. The colonists are going to respond to these taxes. So what they're going to have to do is they're going to form together in numbers and create boycotts. We've talked about boycotts a lot, but a boycott is an organized campaign to be able to refuse to buy or support certain products or services. Now, some modern day boycotts, you could think about several situations. Last year, when many people were all up in arms about Target changing their bathroom policies, a lot of people said, well, I'm just not going to shop at Target. That was a boycott. It was meant to refuse to buy or support certain products or services from Target. They didn't agree with what Target was doing with the restrooms, so they didn't buy from Target. It was simple as that. Another modern day boycott could be the NFL. We all know that Colin Kaepernick took a knee during the national anthem. A lot of people, or he sat during the national anthem, and a lot of people don't agree with that. We're not here to debate that, but we are here to understand that there were people that saw that and disagreed with it and said, well, I'm not going to support the NFL in any way. I'm not going to buy the products that are for the teams. I'm not going to watch the games. So they're not providing the revenue to this service, to the NFL, something that they disagree with. So a boycott for the colonists would be like, if there's a tax on sugar, I'm just not gonna buy British sugar. It's pretty simple as that. But not one person could just do it. If one person said, I'm not gonna buy sugar, that's not going to hurt the person that's selling the sugar enough. So you have to get a lot of people together and in large numbers. If there's many people refusing to buy a certain product, eventually it's going to hurt the person that makes that product enough to be able to make a huge difference in what's happening. In the colonist case, maybe getting the Sugar Act repealed or something like that. So the colonists start boycotting British products, and as a response to the Stamp Act, the colonists actually meet something called the Stamp Act Congress. Delegates from 9 of the 13 colonies met to discuss basically the taxes that had been put on them, like the Stamp Act and the Sugar Act, and they were wondering what they could do possibly to get away from these acts or make them stop. And the best course of action that they came up with was to send the king and parliament a letter saying, please, end the Stamp Act, end the Sugar Act. This is ridiculous. Please don't make us pay these taxes. And honestly, from the colonist perspective, that's kind of all that you can do. You're kind of bartering with your mother country. So the Stamp Act resolves were the papers, the petition that were sent to the king and parliament demanding that they end the Sugar Act and the Stamp Act. Yesterday, I asked a lot of my classes if they thought that asking the King and Parliament to repeal the acts would actually make them repeal them. And most people said no. But surprisingly, the Stamp Act resolves. So the Stamp Act resolves, they worked, and Parliament repealed the Stamp Act in 1766. However, at the same time, they passed the Declaratory Act. And if you were absent and you're taking notes right now, you don't necessarily have to write down anything about the Declaratory Act. But basically what it said was that Europe had complete and total authority over the colonies. So they repealed the Stamp Act, and Britain, in a way, was saying, we're not going to tax you right now, but we could if we wanted to. We could do it at any time, okay? But we're not going to, but we could. They're letting people know that they had total authority over the colonies. And this is definitely going to lead to more problems between the colonists and Britain in the future. And the very last thing that we're going to cover today is the Boston Massacre. So as people get more and more angry about the situation and the taxes in the colonies, there were a group of colonists in Boston that got pretty angry, and they had nowhere really to direct their anger. So they were chilling in downtown Boston. They were mocking British soldiers. They were throwing snowballs with rocks in them at them. You know, things that you wouldn't really enjoy. I don't know how many people would enjoy having a rock covered with snow thrown at them. That would hurt. That wouldn't feel good. So no one really knows, but one of the British soldiers' guns went off, and it killed a colonist. And soon after, the British soldiers continued to fire in the crowd. Eventually, they killed 5 colonists in Boston, and this became known as the Boston Massacre. It was a huge deal, and it was kind of the start or the beginning of the end for the American Revolution actually going to happen. This picture is actually Paul Revere's engraving of the Boston Massacre. It's something that we're going to be talking about several different times. It'll come back up in conversation, and it's definitely in the next video that I'm going to make. Now, the colonists really had no way to spread information quickly. Like I said, they don't have email or text messages, so they had to spread the news of the Boston Massacre via the Committees of Correspondence. And these are basically groups of colonists that get together and they just gather information. They see what Britain's doing and get it out to the people. So they get together all the documents all the things that Britain's doing. They send it out to the next Committee of Correspondence. They send a writer out. He gets to the next committee, and then that committee sends a writer out, and so on and so forth. And eventually, the colonists have found a way to spread information very, very quickly throughout the colonies. And the Committees of Correspondence are huge in that. So today, we really wanted to be able to understand taxation without representation. We wanted to be able to understand boycotts of British goods. We wanted to be able to understand the Stamp Act resolves, Committees of Correspondence, and the Boston Massacre. So for those of you that are absent, if you do have any questions, just let me know, okay? Shoot me an email, whatever you need to do. I'll try to answer you, get back to you as quickly as possible. Thanks, guys, for listening. We'll talk to you later.